So this is a first at PyCon India. Usually we just have regular talks. This time we decided to try a panel discussion. So I'll just talk about the format of the thing and then talk about the topic and then we get started. The basic thing is like the format going to be like we have three people. We have three people who are experts in the area, and I have some questions which I got from the mailing list and other sources earlier, and we're going to have a discussion. We're going to discuss this topic revolving around these questions for maybe 20-25 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up and we can take audience questions and the panel can give responses to those. The topic generally is Python in education. As you know, I don't know many people who are following Python in India specifically. They know that the CBSE is now offering Python as an alternative to C++ in the syllabus and other state syllabuses. Like I know that the Kerala thing has been offering Python since a while ago. Since standard 8 you have Python in the textbooks, and other projects which actually use Python in the education space. So this panel is going to be talking about Python in education specifically at all levels. And as members of the panel, I'll just introduce all of them. From the left first is Dr. Prabhu. He's a member of the faculty at the Department of Aerospace Engineering at IITB, and he's been active in the open source community since '98. He's the creator of Mayavi, an active member of the SciPy community and a nominated member of the Python Software Foundation. He was involved in the setting up of Fossey.in. He also set up the India operations of Nthought Incorporated, who is one of our sponsors today, in 2011 and is currently a director of Nthought India. He also is like coming back to PyCon because he was the keynote speaker at the first PyCon India. Then we have Dr. Ajit Kumar. Dr. Ajit's main area of work is development of instrumentation for particle accelerators and associated experiments, including radio frequency accelerating structures, control and data acquisition systems, digital and radio frequency electronics modules. He's involved in developing laboratory equipment for teaching physics and engineering, following the philosophy of free software. He's been a user and a propagator of free software in the field of education for several years. He's heavily involved with the XPICE project, which will probably come up during the discussion right now. And finally, we have Srikanth. Srikanth's an IT engineer by profession, and he's been in the industry since 1998. He co-founded Mahiti in 2000 and was CTO till 2006, and now the executive director. He's a member of many open source boards and foundations, and his company, they specifically concentrate on using free software in the social sectors, social communities and social sectors. And the past 3 years, he's been trying to mainstream open source technologies in academic institutions. So with that, that's our panel. Please give them a hand. And we'll get started. So I have a bunch of questions here, which I'll be I'll post one or two and then we can get started. Maybe I should sit down. Yeah. So one of the things that came up multiple times when I asked this thing was about the value of Python for attracting people other than engineers into programming. So like, mostly in India specifically, we say like programming is like what engineers do or what CS grads do and things like that. So, but the value of an easy language which people can understand, the value of such a language in actually attracting people who are not programmers by profession into programming. So, do you have any comments and things like that? Just any opinions?
Actually, Python is quite different that way because the kind of data abstraction it provides. I have been able to train many non-engineers to work in my firm, and even in colleges which are not primarily related to engineering disciplines, we have been able to conduct workshop in Python and get quite a good response from the students. So Python that way is quite Python that way is much different compared to many other programming languages. I see it's more adaptable to people who do not have strong database backgrounds and who want to learn programming in an unconventional manner.
So the question you asked is like how Python go to non-engineers, right? First of all, when you see non-engineers, and whom we are meaning basically, like
non-CS, people from a non-technical background. Like if you look at the West, many of the people whose software which we use, their backgrounds are in liberal arts and things like that. But it's very rare in India.
So maybe we should ask a more fundamental question: why one should learn programming at all? Like here, if you ask, like school, we are teaching programming. I think 11th or 12th, we are teaching programming now C++. And I'm trying to address it in a different way, not the technical aspect. But what I've seen is most of the time, majority of them are not interested in programming. They are learning it for the sake of programming because they have to write an exam. So what happens is most of these students doing this, that's a major community, student community, they have been forced to do C++, and what do? They mug it up. And if a programming language is taught for the sake of programming language, I would personally say it should not be taught at all. See, what is the need of a language? I mean, it's a communicating, or in a programming language, you should be able to communicate something, not the language. So that way, if you take Python and try to substitute our C++ in the school level, 11th or 12th, that can make a tremendous change. For example, when you are teaching mathematics or physics or other science, or chemistry or any other science subject, Python is such a valuable tool to teach the other things, like engineering or physics, or suppose you talk about simple mathematical functions. See, mathematical functions, most of the time these equations like you write, so okay, y is equal to sin x, they look a little bit boring. But when you start plotting them, many of the things, they look beautiful, and that at least students get interested. And all these things, if you want to do it in Python, it is hardly 10 minutes effort. Most of the time you have to write only 5 or 6 lines. So that way, I would say Python has a much, this is one aspect. There are many other things. For example, I myself will be talking about, mentioning a little bit later on, where I use Python, that is for doing science and engineering experiments, the real experiments, by coupling Python to a hardware device. So maybe I'll.
So as far as your question is concerned, why India? There's a lack of people who actually who come from a liberal arts background. Say like, yes, Jacob Kaplan Mars is a liberal arts background and he wrote Django. I don't know how many. Better now? But hello world. So the point is, his question was, I guess, why in the US and other countries there are people from liberal arts backgrounds who actually end up writing.
More like how can Python help get people from those backgrounds into programming, and if it's worth it. He expanded the question a little bit.
Okay. So, yeah, so I actually can't speak from experience on that because I have never trained or spoken to people with a liberal arts background. But my belief is, judging by the response that I've got teaching it to engineers who are not CS engineers, generally the response is people love Python. And whether they learn other stuff in courses I teach, most of them learn the Python parts and thank me later. Can't hear me, okay. Sorry. Okay, so I'll repeat. I have not taught liberal arts people in the past, but I have taught people who are engineers, as in non-CS engineers, and all of them, whether they learn anything else in my classes or not, they do learn the Python and they come back. They do learn Python and they come back and thank me for learning Python. And they typically change over to using Python as their primary programming language. So there's a very good chance that Python will have a better chance at winning over some of the non-scientists. The issue there, of course, is where they're going to apply it. For example, if you look at R, I know that humanities departments all over, which are again non-engineering mainstream, a lot of them use R, because then R is so well suited for non-mainstream. For example, in biological sciences, I know people use R heavily, because it's just R is so well suited for their needs. I don't know if Python does have stats modules, but so it really depends on the need. And I don't know if a biosciences person is actually going to be writing a quick art in R or something. So it's the need that drives it in that case.
Okay, then another question that came up, I think it came up earlier and it came up during the keynote today also, was whether it's a bad idea to actually use such a high-level language as as a first language for students, because the argument usually said is like you don't understand what's going on, and it's a toy language and that's all you know, and so because of that you don't really understand computers if you teach using such a simple language at first. So the argument cuts both ways, but it came up during when I asked for questions as well as in the morning keynote. So do you have any comments on that? Like especially since now CBSE is now also introducing Python and stuff. So why should we use something lower level, then only people will understand better that question.
So I have a one sentence quip. Then those same people who are suggesting this should go back to programming with machine language. That's the only argument I have.
I would put it slightly differently, maybe slightly mildly, because I can't get rid of C yet. It depends whom you are teaching. Suppose if you are teaching a high school student or a non-electronics engineer, it should be Python is the choice. But if you are going to teach programming to an electronics engineer who is going to play with the hardware, C is probably C is nothing but assembler with a bit of polish.
Portable assembly. Yeah.
So there you are not going to get rid of C that way. So answer is whom we are going to teach. So if someone wants to play with hardware, he is better off with C, because even my device end is C and the other end is Python. So both has its place. I think they are complementary, not a sort of one against.
Right. So I'd say that basically, to elaborate on the point, is that it's more like a 90-10 rule. I don't think I do some high performance computing, but 90% of my time is actually spent figuring out the algorithms in Python, and then figuring out 10% of the time making that to 5% of my code that has to run really fast, figuring out how to write that fast, and then it's not.
That's true, but I think the point was like as a first language. Is there any audience for which C would be a better first language? And Dr. Ajit says, like for people who are going to, electronics people, it might make sense. So, Sri, any comments?
May not be C, but I would prefer school children learning something much more elementary than Python, because the kind of abstraction it provides, maybe it will be a negative factor if you don't learn something more formal and then come to it. You won't appreciate the beauty of Python if you don't understand the pain that others provide.
That's too much.
But did you also mention that you would think that, say, something like Logo would be a better...
For school kids, I do this experiment all the time. Logo, if you have kids who are less than 12 years old, teach them Logo. They will become amazing programmers, I guarantee you. If they pick up Logo well, I can assure you they are good stuff.
Sorry to hijack the conference.
No, you can ask how many of
how many of you have done Logo programming?
Okay, another thing is like specifically like when you're teaching somebody who doesn't know programming, you're teaching them for the first time. What are the difficulties you encounter? Like there's a certain mindset you need to be a programmer, right? And how does Python play in over there? Like when I teach college level people, like do C and Python workshops, and when you do C, one of the headaches is like you almost immediately you go down into the details of the widths of different types and the memory and accessing and segmentation faults and all that. And in all that detail, the actual point you're trying to convey is lost. But so like at least for the general idea, I'd like to use something where they're away from that, and then maybe like okay, now let's move down to the details. But like, do you have like like stumbling blocks when you try to teach somebody, like with the FOSSEE project, or when you try to do XPRIZE training, when people who are not programmers by nature, when you're trying to teach them, like how does Python help there?
It's a tough question. Generally, it's not easy. I don't try to teach people Python out of the box, particularly if they don't.
What are you doing here?
But probably that should ideally be the second iteration. If they don't know programming, I would not recommend, because for people to understand how computing works, how iterations happen, how computing is all about iterations with conditions, probably I would use a little more simpler this thing and get them on board, and then show them how easy it is to extrapolate it to a more complex work using something like Python. Have never done Python training to someone who does not know programming. Probably it won't go much far, is my gut feeling, unless they are some genius people.
Okay. Again, I think the question is, are you trying to teach programming, or are you trying to teach or get some job done, something else? See, I can only talk about my experience. I was trying to teach developing science experiments. So we gave them a device which they can connect something and then collect data and plot it and all. So in 2005, I was using C language. Only option was you give some executable with GUI, and the teachers, when you say the teachers most of them were above 40 or some are above 50, they were not used to programming. So there was no way I can teach them C and then they get their job done. But later on, when it was switched over to Python, now the situation is most of these teachers within a couple of days, they learn enough Python to get their job done, collect the data, plot the graph and all those things. So again, I'm telling like what you're trying to do, whether you're trying to teach programming or trying to teach some other subject or get some job done through a programming language. So at that point, my experience is Python served the purpose better.
Yeah, so from the FOSSEE's perspective, as far as personal teaching goes, I've only taught engineers who have typically been damaged with C or C++ training. Yeah, I think because many of them, the problem for them is they go through an entire course, as did I. You do CS 101 and you taught C or C++. And at the end of it, you're completely useless. As in, if I ask you to do an assignment and say, okay, plot this as this, they'll give me a plot in Excel. Okay, and it's like very frustrating to see something like that. And they have no, they may understand the language and the syntax of C, but it's just such a headache. It's like torture. You want somebody to make a plot or do some simple numerical computation, but here they have to jump through hoops, do all kinds of things, dump something to a file, and then use GNU-plot to plot it or use Excel to plot it. So so for many of them, Python was like they took to it like fish to water. They just dived in to the point that I used to teach a course on numerical methods, but I was so gung-ho about Python that I'll teach the first 6 or 5 lectures on Python and train them with Python. Basics, nothing very advanced, and have them do a lot of the assignments in Python. And it got to a point that the next class, the next course that they took was a course on computational fluid dynamics, and the instructor would insist on C. And they all complained and said, look, can we submit assignments in Python? He said no, to the point that at the end of the course you give this feedback form. Many of them wrote in his feedback form saying instructor should allow us to submit assignments in Python. And the instructor, next time we took a workshop, came and sat in this. He told me this, saying, look, you're causing me problems. So, and many people, students of the engineering variety, really like it. They're very happy and they switch to using Python. I have not taught people who have no programming experience whatsoever. However, FOSSEE case, what we did was exactly analogous to what Ajit is talking about, which is when we'd come up with our spoken tutorials, we would not center it around the language. So we will actually never expose people saying these are these types, these are fundamental, this is immutable, mutable, this is function, this is first class object, none of that nonsense. We'll simply say, okay, you want a plot, this is the command you use. Oh, how do you create a range of values? This is what you use. Oh, you want to read from a data file, you read this. And then gradually introduce them, oh, you know what, this happens to be an if statement, this is a for loop. And at the end of it, because they're doing something useful, they end up learning, oh, that's what a for loop is. So you learn by example rather than by brute force learning the language per se. Kind of like how you get immersed into a spoken language. Okay, don't quote me on this, but don't question me on my grammar. English, I speak English reasonably well, but if you ask me some grammatical question about, okay, is this a preposition or whatever else it is, I probably will be wrong. Okay. So the reason is I know how to speak English well doesn't mean that I understand its grammar at that level. So if we change the way we teach the language to more applied way, I think you can get people to use something like Python. And the biggest win is it's not about necessarily the language, it's about what you can do with it. So if someone is kicked enough about it saying, hey, you know what, I can do all this cool stuff with Python, then it's self-motivating that they will figure out whatever it needs to be figured out. You figure out more complicated things like a language, like poetry and more abstract stuff than brain-dead programming. So there's no big deal to it. So I really think Python has a good chance here because there's a lot of libraries and it's really an easy language to learn. So that's
you're basically saying teach them to fish rather than...
Exactly, teach them to fish. Don't just teach them this is the syntax of this is F, this is I, this is S, this is X. Fish.
So when the CBSE introduced Python as an option, a lot of people complained that they won't have teachers because they have teachers who have already been trained in C++. If by trained, I use the term loosely, but then now this question of training teachers, and this is like a multi-part question. So the first thing I want to know is like whether you folks are involved yourselves, right, directly. But do you have this problem, like when you want to actually reach out to a wider audience, you need more people who actually know Python up to a level where they can actually teach it, not just maybe use it for their basic stuff. So that kind of thing, because that's the adoption problem. Like if I do something in say Python, I don't get people, and I don't get people who can teach it and stuff like that. It's a chicken and egg thing, but do you have any comments on that? Training teachers, basically, the topic.
See, I'll tell from my professional thing. Basically, in our company, we get a lot of freshers and we train them on Python. We don't have any Python trainers. We just put them onto the tutorials and they learn. And one of the reasons why we stuck to Python is compared to any other platform, in 15 days, I am able to bootstrap my programmers to start being billable. I can't assure that it happens in any other platform. And that's a very big plus for me as a business, that in 2 weeks I can get someone to be productive and earn money for the company. We never used a trainer actually. None of our staff attend any professional courses, corporate courses. They just learn on the job. It's fairly easy. That's how we built the entire institution. So I don't see need for such a thing. If a professor is good in C++, if he spends one day, he will forget C++ and get hooked onto Python.
Yeah, but when you look at a school level, then it's different, right? Because you have to have a teacher who actually knows it and teaches it. So
not really. If you give enough time in the lab for kids who have already understood what programming is, even if it is procedural programming, they will pick it up on their own. I don't think you need to do much more than that at all.
No, what you are talking about is not a language issue, it's our system problem. I mean, see, most of our teachers, they are only teachers, they are not learners. That's the problem. There may be some teachers don't, I need protection. The problem, I tell you, most of the teaching communities. There is another teacher sitting here, so I should be careful. You take school teachers. The attitude is mostly, I have learned something, I have entered my service to teach, then I will only teach. Whatever I have learned, when I entered. And if you take most of them, they learn only if the department compulsorily send them for some sort of refresher course in service course, otherwise you will not get your promotion. And this is our problem. Like, so it is not a Python or C++ problem actually that I'm trying. It is our society's problem. And Python cannot solve that. But we can, but Python volunteers can solve that. Like recently CBSE, after a lot of, pressure from many, pursuing, they said you can use either Python or C++. Now you go to the, like today somebody went and asked the school, headmaster, like, is it possible to switch over? He says, no, we don't have any Python teachers, we have all of C++ teachers. So the only way since most of you are here sitting because you are passionate about Python, so you should offer all the schools, nearby schools, okay, we will give you a training to teach Python for your C++ teacher, and it will hardly take a couple of days because somebody knowing C++, it's 2 days flat you can. And as you told, after that he will just forget his C++ and the advantage is going to be, it will have a lot of impact on how students are going to use this language for learning other things, either physics, chemistry, or mathematics, especially mathematics and physics. So, and that is what I feel about it.
Do you want me to say anything? No, so I know. I think what he's saying is perfectly spot on. About the latter, of course. The other thing we could do, in addition to, of course, people can adapt to school as he suggested. Other thing is.
So another question that's sort of related to this is what the PSSI as an organization here, which has some amount of funding, some amount of people interested in some outreach, can actually do. And so your point about, volunteering to go to schools and offering this is one thing which we can do. So if you have anything else, you can bring it up with this also.
If there is a body, you can even directly approach CBSE and make an offer. Like you have to have a sort of concept like master trainers and they train others. You tell them, you give 100 teachers, we will train them in Python. I mean, reasonably good level, including, see, it's not just language syntax. The application, like once you even like Mayavi and all those things can be, you can ask them to at least do a simple usage of that. You need not be an expert in Python for that. Right? So basically tune it so that they do something useful with that. But you have to make an offer in the right place and to get a start.
The only suggestion there is, if you're going to pursue this, you'll also need to talk to somebody who understands school pedagogy. So all of us come from a programming kind of background or from a college background. So you have to really understand what it is for a student, how do they learn, and actually tailor it, as he says, suitably. So that requires some effort and some thought. So some people have asked me, why don't you write something for CBSE? I'm very reticent because I've never taught a CBSE school. I've never taught a bunch of school kids. So you don't know what you don't know how to appeal to their motivations and things like that. So that needs to be done. The other thing you could do is, of course, we've been fairly successful in doing this in the college area. There's a sister project of FOSSEE called Spoken Tutorial. What they do is they create screencasts and they have a very structured format, solid process as to how these things should be made. There's a script, they translate it to multiple languages. So they have actually a full setup and they also have a huge network. They're also planning to go into school direction. So we maybe tie into something like that, which already has an existing network. See, whereas here, yes, Python is a large, strong community, but the networks they're talking about, they have an actual team of people working on this. So then it's possible maybe if you create material, that material is meant for self-learning. And that might be another way to sort of alleviate this personnel problem of training and things like that. That's a possibility.
Okay, I think I have a lot more questions, but I think we've covered most of the general areas. Can we open it up for audience questions now? I think someone can take this mic for the audience if there's somebody.
I would like to add up to that CBSE introducing Python to CBSE. I would like to give an example. A brother of mine who studies in Delhi, Sachdeva Public School. So they introduced Python in his course, and he took Python for 2 months, and then they stopped. I don't know for what reason. But after doing Python for 2 months, he started creating his own blogs. 11th school child creating his own blog, and while that he realized the doing some small stuff like using for loops, like how easy you can use for loops in Python, and how easy you can do stuff which is being done, which you are taking so much time in C. You can do it in Python very quickly. And now after about 3 or 4 months, he's handling a site which takes a load of 4,000 people a day. 4,000 people a day. So 11th school child is handling a site which is decently large, is scaling up. So and now he's like more intended toward programming language. He wants to know more. He can easily relate it what's going on in C. He can. So if I put a question to him, he can give me an answer, which is something which I can would not expect with a 11-year student. So I think it's benefit. It's good they are introducing it in CBSE. Just to add up to the point. Thank you.
Yeah. So I want to ask something as a Python community. Is there something that we can do to help the adoption of Python in schools or otherwise? Okay. So a lot of people. So we conducted Python workshops as part of the PyCon India conference. We called it Python Month and all over India. So some people actually propose that we should also do some workshops at schools and all that. But like someone pointed, you need to know how to appeal to a school. Okay. So now, is there anything that we can do as a community? Maybe make a book or find interesting examples that school can. So I want if you can think about something and then suggest so that when after the conference we can actually discuss and see if we can come with a plan for as PyCon India volunteers will actually wrote a book or made something like that.
Yeah, I strongly support. I mean, I think if you start an effort to actually put together a group of people who care about this problem, we can easily find people. I mean, there are lots of good people who understand school pedagogy. For example, I know in IIT Bombay, there's Professor Sridhar Iyer from Computer Science. He's actually written Computer Masti, which is like a book intended for primary school kids to understand programming, what is a mouse, things, very basic things. So the point is, it's easy to get people. I mean, given everybody here in this room, we can find certainly a set of people, at least half of the audience would have taught a student at some point something that they found, hey, this was cool. If you know that there are hundreds of these examples, if you even put those together, say in an IPython notebook or something, and make a resource available, and also then proactively go after schools, maybe have people, like you have Debian maintainers. Maybe you could have a mentor for a school. So each person takes up a school and says, I will take charge of this school. Because it's not enough if you just do one workshop. At least in FOSSEE we have realized, you do a workshop and that's the end of it. Most probably the workshop will have some people through the workshop. At the end of it, the department is going to have a listing saying we conducted this workshop this year, and that's the end of that. You have no idea how many people actually adopted the language. You have no idea how many people are going to take it up. You have no idea whether the situation has changed in the school. So unless you actually take school by school, somebody takes mentorship, right? It's not going to actually sustain. And all of these things take a lot of time. That's one thing that I learned from FOSSEE, that when he started off, he's just desperately doing workshops. But then after 4 years, there's enough people know about you. People start contacting. You have more reach. So it takes a order of years before you can actually start seeing the visibility of that impact. So if we are patient and we put together a reasonable team, I think we should be able to pull it off, is what I feel.
Hello. Yeah. So as part of my job, we actually sell an educational robotic kit and a visual programming language in more than 250 schools in India. And I get to talk to a lot of teachers, a lot of guys who run and install softwares in the labs, right? Because they have some debugging issue and they contact us. So one of the problems that they are facing with Python right now is that they are all reinventing their own textbook for the schools. So for example, you have this APJ college in Navi Mumbai where I was there 3 weeks back. They have opted for C++ this year, so they have the choice, you can pay for a year. And why they're doing this is because they have contracted someone to write the textbook for them. So what is happening on the ground right now is that a lot of schools are not referring merely the NCERT book for Python. They want to do something of their own. They want to have their own pedagogy inside. So there's a lot of duplication happening. So to add to, Anand's question that can the community do something? So I believe that there are a lot of schools that cannot afford to do this exercise of coming out with a curriculum or, kind of having a textbook. So this is somewhere something can be done by the community and the book can be open source. And Sir mentioned about Computer Masti at IIT Bombay. So I think people should just look at Computer Masti books and the kind of pedagogy they have. I've seen them and it's exceptionally good and probably something can be done in this. Thank you.
Resources we are looking for, I think ITH School website may have something. Because ITH School project in Kerala, they have already, generated some resources at that level, school level. Yeah, that also is there. And and another thing, let's let your question again, how to support people. I can only just explain what my experience was. Several years back, somewhere I saw a posting in the mailing list. Someone was asking in BSc Mathematics, we want to introduce a course on computation. So then mentioned what should we go for, either Scilab or so many other R, there are so many packages, octaves. So that time I just casually replied, why don't you try Python, and you have a lot of libraries so that you have one language to hold on and get things done by libraries. Like you have Matplotlib for plotting, and then you have SciPy, NumPy, and this Mayavi, all sorts of things. And apparently they took it and introduced that, and first year it ran without any textbook, just references on the web and Python. Then they were finding it difficult, and then when I had some notes, and finally I wrote a small textbook for them. It's not something very good or anything, but just to meet the purpose. And all I'm trying to say is, if you are passionate about Python, if someone is looking for help, just latch on to that, provide whatever support you can give, otherwise just keep on, you just refer to somebody else who can help, instead of not responding. So that way we can probably get more and more people into this, and once that more and more people come, the things will automatically improve.
I was having a discussion with Naufal, in the lunchtime. So my thinking is that the education, problem in general in computer science in schools is a multi-layered, problem, because, one issue is that when you start teaching something, it kind of becomes like something that you have to get a grade in. And, I think you mentioned, Dr. Ajit kind of briefly mentioned this. So, maybe the options, when you're teaching something as dynamic as Python and interesting is that, probably you teach it in a bit different way. You introduce, gaming modules. So Naufal mentioned that gaming is kids get attracted to gaming, for example, right? And that might be a fun way to teach it. So, there are two things there. I have, for example, tried to do this to my kid, and what I found was that he was more interested in playing the game than in trying to find what is the code behind the game. So, it is really a multifaceted thing, and gaming might be one solution, but what my feeling is that rather than teaching it like a curriculum with question and answers and a assessment at the end, it might be better to do it in terms of small mini projects. So I would like to hear the panel's thoughts on this.
Okay. Game is of course one option, and sometimes I feel another option is like you can get into this robotics or other things. Not high end. There are always robotics at the toy level, right? Maybe I'll ask a question. Almost all of you program, and say you write some code and the output comes on the screen. If it is drawing a circle or something, see, as a beginner programmer, we feel happy, okay, the result has come. But suppose, say, if you are writing, say, 2 lines or 5 lines of code, and if you are able to, say, switch on a light or, move something on the table, does it really excite? I don't know. I mean, I'm just asking you, how many of you feel that is slightly exciting compared to? Okay, there is a good number. I hope they are really. So that also is quite easy to do with Python nowadays, with the kind of things available in the market and inexpensive things. So you can make things more exciting in that way. Say connect some cheap device to USB port, and with this you can control things. And in that process you just learn the language. But none of these things can be a part of a syllabus probably.
So I think you're absolutely right. So some people playing the game is more important. For some people, writing the code is more important. So they have the whole spectrum. For example, at Nthought we had this 10th standard. Is it 10th standard? 10th or 11th standard. He had an intern. The guy actually wrote a sort of very simplistic. He loved Python so much, but we had to give him some work with involved little JavaScript. He wrote something which will convert Python to JavaScript. I mean, at a 10th standard level. So you have kids who are like really off the charts, who love to program. And then you're obviously going to have the full spectrum. You'll have some people who don't care. No matter what you do, they're not going to want to program. They'll just bungle through that exam. So I think what would really help these kids is if you have a plethora of these examples. It shouldn't be just gaming. It shouldn't be just lifting a robotic arm. It shouldn't be just, okay, here's a more theoretical aspect. It shouldn't be something. If we can tie it into every aspect of their syllabus, that will be fantastic. So if we can say, here's an example from physics, you can plot this, or I don't know. So this is where again you need to talk to somebody who's been involved with teaching kids, who understands their psychology, who can appeal to them with meaningful examples. I think so. It should be done with some thought, which is why we shouldn't just have a computer scientist guy say, okay, here's a textbook, and that's not going to work. That's what I think.
One last question.
One thing which I would like to say is we can set the guidelines for the syllabus in there can be some basics with Python which can help the student learn about objects and all those things, and at later stages in a year they can be given exposure to library and all. So in a way it would help them to understand the basics as well as the abstraction part of it, the libraries and all. So we can set guidelines for it, in the school level and all those things. So I just wanted to know your views on it.
So if I understand, let me rephrase his thing. His thing was, correct me if I'm wrong, was that it'll be nice if there was a graded way of doing this. You don't always start with the highest level. You start with something which is like baby thing, for example, fill in the blanks. You have an existing script or something where you can change something and then they see the effects. And they slowly, gradually learn language. Is that right? So you build it up and then you build a library on top of that and then sort of build it up from 8th grade all the way to your 12th grade. Something.
Yeah, good suggestion. Probably it would work, but you don't need such a long gestation period to pick on Python, right? You will pick it up fast. If you figure out what is programming, you will pick it up pretty fast.
So the thing where I don't know the actual numbers, where I kind of am not sure about is, see, it's no longer a question of somebody using this as a hobby language to do something. Because there you have a person who's actually motivated. Here somebody is going to do it because, hey, the syllabus says this, I'm going to learn this. It's as bad as mathematics or whatever. Every subject, if you look at it well, is actually very interesting. So it's really a matter of, okay, your teacher, very often we don't like some subjects. Why would somebody not like math? Why would somebody not like physics? If you really think about it. If Feynman was teaching you, obviously you're going to be interested in it, right? So it's a function of the teacher, and we know the quality of the teachers is not the greatest. So maybe the role of, say, the PSSI would be to maybe generate material that's fascinating enough that regardless of how lousy or good the teacher is, that students actually find Python exciting enough that they will, if we can do that, that will be fantastic. But to do that is going to require a fair bit of effort from our side, and I think it's probably worth it, because it's talking of the next generation of everyone who goes through CBSE it's a huge fraction of our population. You'll have the largest number of Python programmers in the world. So world domination, here we come. So.
Okay, so that was fun. I think, but we're out of time right now, so we have to stop. So I just thank everyone for coming. I think it was fun discussing this, and I think we have some action plans also. I think with the PSSI specifically. I just want to say a small thing that I think Dr. Ajit, you'll have a XPRIZE demo tomorrow. Yeah, at one of the open spaces. So if you're interested in the project itself, you can actually go there. Apart from that, I'd like we give the panel a hand because for spending their time with us. And thank you for coming. Yeah.
I just want to say you should seriously check out his demo. It's really it's awesome. Yeah. It's always fun seeing his demos. So seriously, don't miss it.
Yeah. Okay. So make sure you see the demo tomorrow. So thank you.